Very good afternoon to you. Thanks for staying with us on the PM edition of Newsfeed right here on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. I'm Tole. Now, the state capture inquiry was instituted by then-President Jacob Zuma on the 23rd of January in 2018. 4 years and one president later, we're still waiting on the fifth and final report. There has been little action against those implicated in the first 4 installments, making the public wonder if anyone will be held accountable for their actions. For more on this, I'm joined by political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. A very good afternoon to you, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. The State Capture Commission has uncovered the most shocking of revelations, with almost 300 witnesses exposing the extent of corruption in South Africa. No prosecutions or sentences have yet been handed down. Has it all been worth it?
Well, in my view, yes, because it's not only about how many people are going to be prosecuted and ultimately sentenced. There's many aspects of the Zondo Commission which goes beyond that. First of all, I think before we even look at the outcome that reports is the procedure or the process that was followed. And part of that was the fact that we saw it on a daily basis on TV, on national TV, very similar to that of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that's why I think I and many other people also refer to it as a form of a truth commission about corruption or state capture in South Africa. And I think it formed the public opinion to a large extent about this. And therefore, the public in general is much more informed about the nature of state capture and the nature of corruption and the different dimensions of it, as well as it formed an opinion about that it must never happen again, and that there must a type of a deterrence must develop in order to make it as difficult and as costly as possible for any person in future to be involved in corruption again.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that corruption has disappeared, but I think we are looking about a long-term perspective of how corruption should be dealt with in South Africa.
As we take stock of that long-term perspective, at the end of its 4-year-long investigation, how then do we begin to assess the work of the Commission?
Well, first of all, it is whether they have given us, met their mandate. And that was to provide a clarification of what state capture was, because 4 years ago or 5 years ago, the concept was actually contested, and some persons actually said, well, it is a fabrication, it's an imagination, it's not something that really happened. What I think what the Commission did is to give us real content about what happened, the explanations of what happened in the Treasury, in the different SOEs, the relation, what happened in the Treasury, how was the process of the dismissal of the Finance Minister in Nhlanhla and the appointment of Des van Rooyen. It went into very much detail about that, and it provided us also with an understanding of what went wrong. And then in some of the parts of that report, it actually started to provide some recommendations also. So it is a very wide-reaching report, and many people, yes, are saying it cost too much money, it took too long, and we don't see the results yet. But I think what I'm trying to argue is that it is something which has changed the way in which the public in South Africa looked at state capture, how the government started to approach it. And now the table is set for the National Prosecuting Authority to act on it. And they have now, I think this past week, indicated that they are it will be impossible to prosecute everyone that's implicated in these reports, but that they will start with 9 high-profile cases which are winnable for them in order to set a process or create a momentum of successes, so that it's not that there's the impression that the NPA cannot act on this. It is overwhelmed by the information and by the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, because that is easily possible. It is such a wide-reaching document that it can become impossible to do actually anything about it.
Absolutely. During the years of former President Jacob Zuma, state capture was often a concept that was discredited, but it was also a concept much bigger than Zuma, especially considering the infiltration of ANC politicians into state-owned enterprises.
Yes, that is indeed so. I think when the commission started, most of us thought it is primarily about the Gupta family's involvement and relationship with government members. But what we've seen right from the start is that the approach was much broader. It focused on much more things. And what we've seen over and above that relationship between the Gupta family and the Zuma family and other persons also, it started to look at the way in which government institutions were affected and how they were eroded in terms of their human capital, in terms of the persons in those positions who made them work, as well as their finances, their budgets that just went awry and was not spent as they were supposed to be. The undermining of SOEs, ESCOM, while we have now load shedding again, is possibly one of the best examples, but there's others also, Transnet, and then even small ones, Alex Core and others, that were directly affected by it. And some of it was not so much about whether the Gupta family was involved in it or not. It started to develop a momentum of its own. Under sometimes the auspices or the leadership or the guidance of senior politicians, members of the cabinet and other senior members, especially in the ANC. So it became such a network that it is today very difficult actually to pinpoint where the intervention should take place in order to completely unravel this. And I think this is why this report is so useful. It gives us that a very good picture, a very broad picture of where are the different aspects and where are the relevant aspects of the notion of state capture.
Professor, you make reference to corruption's devastating effects now being in the open because of state capture. The awareness, though, was not enough to deter the looting of COVID-19 emergency funds. But as a result of the looting, we're hearing government officials now warning against the looting of the KwaZulu-Natal flood relief funds. Is this a sign that it could still be early enough to hopefully prevent the irreversible disintegration?
Yes, well, I think this is the hope of all of us, and I think this is the function of the Zondo Commission, that it was a measure of exposing. So the public especially, and hopefully also the government and public sector officials, now understand the consequences, the impact that it has, and that it should be avoided at all costs, that it become embedded in our society at different levels, whether it is in government or is it in relationship with the private sector or the private sector on its own, which is incidentally has also been one of the focus areas of the Zondo Commission. And in order to avoid that it settles down into and become part of the acceptable norms of our society. Once it's there, at that point, it's almost impossible to deal with corruption anymore. So I think it's still early enough, late, but still early enough in order to implement measures, and some of them we are starting to see, in order to turn around or to untangle the patronage networks that developed over time. Unfortunately, some of it has become embedded in politics itself. And in party politics. And that's what I think what you have in mind when you talk about the PPE fraud or corruption that we've seen lately. Because it's not then anymore depending just on individuals in government, but it becomes a norm. It becomes acceptable behavior. And I think that is the main point which we have to guard against, and why systematic measures must be implemented in government. And I think this is where, for example, even in the first part of the report, there's quite a number of recommendations about the procurement processes that the public sector must follow in order to avoid that in future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in there. Political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze speaking to the successes of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry report and, of course, the impact that it will have on society. Now,